Oh, and so beautiful. Thank you, everybody. Deep reminders, sharings of the reality. It's like there's the mandala, and then there's each of us walking it. And I just want to bring us to the guide's quotes. This is from 82, where he's talking about this. So he says, it's when you accept death in its undisguised nakedness without running from it that you can truly live. And only then will you find that there is no death and no duality. You'll accept this not as a consoling faith to which you cling out of weakness and fear, but as actual experience. And you can experience this only in the infinitely great and ultimate issues when you learn to experience it first in your daily little deaths. When your will is not done and you cringe from suffering in the wrong, unhealthy way, you increase the tragic duality. You reject death, and therefore, in the ultimate sense, you reject life. The flight from death and suffering causes flight from life and pleasure, often inadvertently. No matter how much one may strive for joyful participation in life and pleasure, when one consciously or unconsciously avoids facing and meeting death and suffering, the escape will also be a flight from life and pleasure. So, it's this deep invitation for us to sort of embrace the unembraceable, right? And especially all our own faults, as Sonia was talking about, right? And it's interesting to me because 81, 82 are both on this duality of life and death, and then 83 is on the idealized self-image. So I think there's a very deep correspondence in our issues with death that show up in our ISI. So I want to speak just a minute more to sort of also, I think, the larger cultural mission that this is affording Pathwork, and I'm hoping that people will carry this on in other creative ways, right? But I've been very taken by a man, Francis Weller, who wrote a book called The Wild Edge of Sorrow. And he talks about the 5 gates of grief. And he talks about how in our culture we are so avoidant of grief. And I actually take it back to, the recreation of childhood hurts in the Pathwork, right? The guide is saying underneath all of our other feelings is this simple pain, this simple loss, right? And so we really are in constant defense against grief. And so he talks about these 5 gates, and I think it's useful to kind of open and explore and widen our horizons on this. So, of course, the first gate of grief is that everything we love, we will lose. Right? In the field of time, this is the medicine wheel teaching, nothing lasts. We get to hold on to nothing. It's a fierce truth, and yet it is the way it is. And in a sense, the loss of another person who's close to us is about the only way our culture acknowledges and allows for grief and grief rituals. And even then, I think you get a week off or something, it's kind of this expectation that you bounce back. Well, in tribal cultures, they would have a grief teepee or hut or something, and the person would be excused from their tribal duties for a whole year. The whole community would come together in honoring that grief and in mourning that grief, right? And releasing that grief. So, we have a lot of dysfunction in our world around this. And I think it's part of what keeps us also, sort of our culture wants to stay forever in the South, right? We always want to be adolescents. And so, we feel like we can't bear grief and we just want to know when the pain is going to end. And yet, once we've lost something, it's not that grief ends, grief changes us. So we have to, learn to embrace grief in a different way, right? And honor that journey and honor the truth of what grief offers to us. And it's really never too late to grieve. And there's a lot of unmet grief that we've stored. And this is part of what the Pathwork works with the, childhood wounding and everything. But we actually, store it in our bodies, and it, like eventually can, become illness. So in some deep way, Pathwork is this wonderful invitation to hold our grief, to give ourselves the loving support, to call on our community, to call on the divine to be with us, and hold us in our moments where we're in sorrow. And also sometimes grief is not sorrow. Sometimes it is the deepest no and rebellion in our being, right? And in some ways, in that no to loss, there's a certain divine quality of truth. It's a temporary truth of the moment, right? But unless we speak that truth, we can't go past it. And it's part of the truth of grief. So we work, with learning and welcoming and working in our bodies with supporting this releasing of grief. And sometimes we can even do it without any hard pain, without any big drama. It actually just, we can release in soft pain. And it feels very healing and truthful for us. And in some ways, that's, to me, the goal of our surrender and our ultimate process with this. So there's another gate of grief, right, that's really important here too, which is, the places inside of us, and we alluded to this, that have not known love. And so all of the parts that we were told were not right, were not okay, did not fit in, our exuberance, sensitivity, sadness, all had to go into the wasteland. It did not fit the motive of the family or the culture. So we tend to gather shame around whatever we push away. And we do our best to banish these unwelcome parts. So it's necessary in our journey around the wheel to give them a way to return through the conduit of sorrow. And we have to grieve for these parts of us. Grieve for something. It's really hard, though. It's like we can't grieve for something we hold in contempt. And so this is a lot of what the work is, in some ways, is to really see, in the ISI, how much we're holding against ourselves, and how that blocks the grief as well. And so the energies become marooned in the wasteland until we can begin to see them as worthy of compassion and worthy of grieving over. And then there are the sorrows of the world. And somebody mentioned that in our introduction. And I know we're all sitting in it in many, many ways, not only the COVID sorrows, but the environmental sorrows, the global warming sorrows, it's like, so there's a litany of losses, which is long and never ending. And the impact on us psychically is not to be overestimated, right? There's a deep grieving that we are holding for the whole planet. And deep inside, whether we feel it consciously or not, we are aware of the distress of the collective, whether it's human or more than human world. And so deep inside, we're aware already of this. And then just even in our own lives, the loss of beauty has already cost us tremendously. The new strip mall that was put, like there's so many trees going down, it's like there's just kind of, in a way, around us, we just see the evidence of this. And beauty is something that we don't really understand and recognize completely, but it's kind of like one of the foundations and what our soul needs, part of the divine. And there's also beauty in our diversity, right? And so like humanity has cut itself off from all of that diversity in the planet and in each other. And so there's this biologist, Paul Shepard, he says the whole evolutionary sweep of humanity since the development of agriculture has been a slow descent. He says we were born into a sacramental world. And then with agriculture, it became a sacrificial world. and now more and more an artificial world. And there's not many cultures where a deep universal sense of intimacy still lives. So without this intimacy and connection with the larger real of life, it is terrifying. We can't let go, to go into the death, is something that we contract against. So we need, this larger holding, and we need this connection with each other and also the more than human world. He says that there's a grief and sense of loss, which we often attribute to some kind of failure in our own personality. And he says it's actually a feeling of emptiness where a beautiful and strange otherness is meant to be encountered. And I know in the Pathwork, as we receive each other in the sharing circles and the deep work that we do with each other, that's what touches us. We connect with the beauty of that, strange otherness, but also similar otherness, right? It brings us together. We recognize in each other. And then we in the land, recognize all of this beauty and otherness that is also part of us and one with us. So this beauty is an entomological necessity, for the gods touch the senses and reach the heart to attract us into life. And so without beauty, we have anesthesia. Beauty is aesthetics, right? Aesthesia. So anesthesia, numbness is what happens. Amnesia and anesthesia. Forget and go numb. That's what we're fighting against, right? And we engage in a profound and prolonged effort to fix and solve what we feel is an interior problem of sadness and grief, when really what's been lost and is waiting for us is, something that we've longed for to connect with outside. The beautiful and strange otherness in your eyes that I see reminds me of my own wildness. So the goal is not to be cut off from the scintillating world of green and blue, and not to be separated from the law of the stars. And it's our conditioning in this culture that does separate us from the law of the stars. We were designed to be embedded in primal matter, the original matrix of evolution. And when we separate, we become autistic to the world. So, and then there's just two more. So there's a fourth stage of grief where it's the grief of what we expected and did not receive. Right? And if you think about it, like in some ways, we're still biologically, we arrive as Stone Age children. We arrive expecting a village. We arrive expecting 40 pairs of eyes to greet us and be in this living dance with nature with us, right? And so there's this profound sense of absence and loss. I'm feeling empty inside. Where's my tribe? Why am I so alone? And I hear this many, many times in sessions and stuff. And in some ways it's, our inner work, our individual images, etc. But it's also something real in our culture and in our world where we've lost this connection, with a tribe, with a community. And so again, I see Pathwork as being a part of the answer, part of the movement back into this possibility. So there is a fifth gate of grief, which is ancestral grief. And I think we were, we had this, beautiful program on trauma, ancestral trauma, right? The world is sort of waking up to this level and how we all are carrying the losses of generations. So, when we are not able to have a sense of place that goes back 300 years because our people have been uprooted, moved. I find deep sense of place is such a healing thing, and so I have a lot of compassion for the great diaspora that's happening now, and so many people that find themselves without a home, without a place to be. So those are the 5 gates of grief. And you know, some way of, you know, communally holding and acknowledging and supporting that is what I feel is a promise of our work together, and a way to go into a journey of really exploring the whole of our life at this stage of our life, you know, as we have many years behind us, you know, it's like looking back, and it feels like a very powerful work to explore at this moment for the community, for the larger whole, and for ourselves, you know, this understanding of facing death, of it's a good day to die, of exploring what are we, you know, I mean, letting go of, right? You know, we can imagine our fears of a difficult death, of a painful death, right? But in some ways, ultimate death, I believe, is this shedding of all the roles. So you might, you know, imagine, you know, letting go to different stages. And this is part of what the medicine wheel also is teaching, you know, and the journey around it, that we let go of one stage and open into another. Not letting go of all of everything that we've known, the whole story of this lifetime is what we meet at the end. What a profound, profound moment of surrender. And there was a man I just recently discovered on doing some work on grieving, and he was saying it's a responsibility of the elders to kiss the world on both cheeks as they leave. And I love that, right? You know, it's like it's like if we can also embody that yes to life through it all, and help people. And we have to work at our own self. I mean, Lord knows my no's are still many, and yet it's just meeting them. You know, it's not being beyond them. It's just meeting them each moment, each step of the journey.